When I was a child, I remember seeing Soviet tanks on the streets of Afghanistan, where I was born. I was completely terrified. The tanks seemed inhuman and indestructible. I felt powerless next to the tanks. And my country, people, seemed powerless too. At that point in my life, and for many years after, for me, tanks came to represent war. To my young mind, they seemed like the most powerful weapons in the world. And the idea that people could defeat them without having a more powerful military weapon seemed absurd. But now I see things differently. I no longer look at a tank and see it as indestructible. In fact, I've learned to look at a tank and see its weaknesses. Almost all of you will recognize this image. It's Tiananmen Square in 1989, and hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters have just been killed. But in a stunning moment of defiance, one man decided to block the path of a tank using only his body. Most people assume that after this picture was taken, that the man was crushed by the tanks. But that's not what happened. In fact, the tank did stop, and then it swerved. The man once again jumped in front of the tanks, and the tank swerved again. This entire column of tanks was blocked, if only for a few moments, by this one man. The poet Bertolt Brecht escaped Nazi Germany, and he wrote the following: "General, you're the powerful vehicle. It smashes down forests and crushes 100 men. But it has one defect. It needs a driver." Brecht saw something that, if only we could all see it, would change the world. The most powerful weapon is not a tank. It's not a military weapon at all. It's a human one. It's the capacity and the willingness of human beings to disobey and to defy and to refuse to cooperate with injustice and oppression. It's the political application of a type of behavior that thankfully comes very naturally to all of us. It's basic human stubbornness. In short, it's the power of no. And the power of no is the fundamental basis of nonviolent action. I've been studying nonviolent action and working to promote it around the world for years. And during that time, I've learned something that I'd like to share with you today. Nonviolent action can make a tank as useless as if a bomb had been dropped on it. Brecht, our poet, says that a tank has one defect. It needs a driver. But actually, a tank has many defects or weaknesses. For a tank to work, it needs engineers and oil drillers and truck drivers, factory workers and communication specialists. And you get the point. For a tank to work, it requires a lot of people. And if just one of these groups refuses to cooperate, a tank can be made useless. For example, tanks need fuel. And if petroleum workers go on strike, tanks can't move. In Iran, in 1978, almost 40,000 oil workers went on strike to demand political change. And the strike paralyzed the economy so badly that it caused the government to collapse. And it forced the ruling Shah and his wife to flee the country. Also, to build a tank and to keep it running requires a lot of money. And people can refuse to supply that money. In 1971, the defense minister of France announced plans to expand a military base in a countryside area called Larzac. But here's the problem. There were hundreds of sheep farms on the land, and the farmers refused to leave. They gained supporters from around the country, and that year, thousands of people refused to pay their taxes. Instead, they donated the money to the farmers. This went on for 10 years, and eventually, the government gave in, and all the farms were saved. Last but not least, as Brecht says, a tank needs a driver that is willing to obey commands. When the Soviet Union invaded Lithuania in the early 1990s, they sent tanks to take over Lithuania's government buildings and military bases. But over 1 million Lithuanian citizens from all walks of life surrounded the government buildings. When the tanks approached the buildings, they were faced with a sea of people. And when Moscow ordered the tanks to push through the crowd, the drivers refused. Lithuania has maintained its independence ever since. But a tank is just one tool in a military system. And the military itself is just one system that a government can use to impose its will on the population. There are others: the media, the judiciary, the police, the administrators, the financial systems, and the transportation systems. And all of these systems depend on countless people in order for them to work. Without widespread obedience and cooperation from multitudes of people, a government cannot maintain its power. Let's look at one of these institutions, the media, for example. In many oppressive states, the media is just a tool for government propaganda. But even a state-controlled television channel requires producers and financiers and directors and camera builders and actors in a studio and camera operators. And if just one of these groups refuses to cooperate, propaganda can be made useless. In the 1980s, there were a lot of people in Poland who were fed up with government propaganda. In a small town called Świdnik, people found a creative way to show that propaganda doesn't work if no one's watching. So each night, when the evening news came on, they took their televisions for a walk. They put their TVs in shopping carts and baby strollers and simply walked them down the streets. Other people unplugged their televisions and placed the television sets in the windows facing the streets. And the government was angry, but what could they do? Going for an evening stroll wasn't illegal. There are countless people around the world who are facing their own seemingly impossible struggles today. They're facing their own tanks, oppressive systems that seem all-powerful and overwhelming and impossible to overcome. Too often, people try to fight oppression with violence. But this is precisely where oppressors are the strongest, in military capacity. What if instead we fought oppressors where they are weak, where they depend on our cooperation and our obedience? Because here's the crucial point. If we can see how an oppressive system depends on what we do or what we refuse to do, then we can begin to build a nonviolent strategy that can actually change that system or even destroy it. We are at an important moment in human history. Nonviolent struggle is being used by people around the world in new and creative ways. Right here in Baltimore, there have been ongoing protests since Freddie Gray died in police custody last April. And what's happening here has inspired and informed the larger Black Lives Matter movement around the United States, as well as anti-oppression movements around the world. A lot has happened this year. People in Guatemala carried out a general strike in which they refused to work until their corrupt president resigned from power. This action, among others, was successful within 5 days. Women in Uganda stopped the government from seizing their village by taking off their clothes when soldiers came for their land. It's considered a curse in Ugandan culture to see an older woman naked. Maybe other cultures as well. So when the soldiers were ordered to shoot on the women, they refused. And when demonstrations were banned at last month's climate summit in Paris, activists found another way to fill the streets. They used only their shoes. Even Pope Francis sent his shoes to join the demonstration. And all of this is happening with more strategic planning than ever before. People are beginning to understand that we must learn from the available knowledge of how nonviolent struggle works and the history of those who have used it to gain freedom, like Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And not only them, but others whose names are less well known. We no longer need to rely on intuition or improvisation. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The tools to conduct nonviolent struggle effectively and skillfully exist, and they're being improved and refined every day. People around the world are beginning to understand and realize what my colleague and mentor, Gene Sharp, has famously said. Oppressors are never as strong as they tell you they are, and people are never as weak as they think they are. So I challenge you to shift your perspective. What is the tank that you want to disassemble? What is the oppressive system that seems impossible to overcome? And then, instead of seeing that system as one entity, see it instead as made up of different parts. Parts that rely on our cooperation, participation, and obedience. Because just as a tank has fatal weaknesses, so also do other systems. And that fatal weakness could be your disobedience and your willingness to say no. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.